Hi, I am Eric Ehrenstoff with the E3 Rate of the Union Special Mid-Year Economic Report. Today, a slightly different approach to focus on something less commonly discussed, but incredibly relevant today: consumer sentiment as it is related to the economy. First, on its face, the American economy looks great. Unemployment is near record lows, wage growth is outpacing inflation, and yet, despite this, more than half of Americans feel dissatisfied with their own financial situation. 70% feel that economic conditions are poor. What is the disconnect leading this high feeling of discontent in our economic growth? I'm going to parse out perceptions, feelings, and sentiment versus fundamental facts. So I invite you during the following to tune your ear to hear these differences. First, there exists a deep feeling that the system is not working. And there is some fundamental research about intergenerational differences that support this, feeling that we're worse off than our parents were, a decline in equality, economic mobility, and social mobility today versus the past. And here's something fascinating that is not commonly realized. Big government never went away. It only grew bigger. And I don't only mean the past 4 years or 8 years, even past 25 years. I'm talking about 100 years when we started measuring it. I'm citing specifically the measure of government spending as a share of the economy, as a present percentage of GDP. 100 years ago, it was 3% of the GDP. Today, it is over 36%. Despite which government administration was in office, again, not political, even under the Reagan years, 80s, recall Reagan was a big proponent of reducing big government, but government spending still never declined. It has only increased. So what's bad then about the economy that has this sentiment so high? Well, shift your focus to a pattern of behavior that a generation has experienced economically and what it's come to expect. It's not so much about spending, it's about regulation, and more specifically, bailouts. Over the last 2 decades, the government has introduced over 3,000 new regulations per year, and a total which we have withdrawn only 20 in over 20 years. This hurts small and medium-sized businesses, the barrier of entry. It gets more expensive to set up businesses and to compete. Recall the first huge bailout in '84. It was the S&L crisis, remember that? And since then, the 2000 millennium bubble burst, 2008 financial meltdown, the pandemic of 2020. Bailouts have become the norm, Pavlovian even. So let's go back to the sentiment that we were just talking about moments ago. The economy is fundamentally performing better, but the feeling is that it's not. Many think correctly that the rich fat cats were the ones getting bailed out, and Americans ask themselves, what am I getting out of this? It's not about a government spending, it has more to do with the bailout culture. The regulation of business cycle, it resembles and is much like another culture that is happening today, the pain management system that we have in our health system today, where the same culture has anxiety, fear, depression, and with it, the arguably overprescribing of pain, anxiety, antidepressant medication when the first sign of something becomes uncomfortable. It folds into the explosion of drug and opiate usage today as an alternative means to numbing discomfort. So there's a near zero tolerance to any pain today, the feeling of an immediate need to relieve oneself of discomfort. This is with small, medium-sized companies and the middle class, in contrast with there being much less competition at the top. We see more monopolistic structure, industries after industries consolidated, many companies into the few. And with it, policy being heavily financially influenced to favor Goliath over David. Now, remember, capitalism as its essence best works when there is pro-competition, right? Pro-small person, the new people coming in, a barrier of entry that is more possible. What we have today is pro-big business, pro-regulation, and pro-incumbent. And the feeling, the sentiment that this system is rigged against small business and growth. On the individual side, we cannot ignore media, social media, and its influence, right? It is pervasive today. And again, let's look at this evolving over the last 100 years, the last 25 years today. The politicization and weaponization of human behavioral psychology is prominent, being employed, and fundamentally significant. Think Robinhood, GameStop, Bitcoin, getting likes, all of this sentiment around social media and pressure and the way that people are getting news today. You can ask any person, would you like to have more money? Do you want more comfort? Might you desire more financial freedom, more? Of course you would. I would. And when the messaging is curated to make us feel entitled to it, we will always want more. That is the human circumstance. It's natural. So playing on that today more than ever before, like we've never seen before, the way social media can, you could always say that the current economic circumstances could always be better, a little bit better. The perception measurement criteria has shifted from a reasonable level of accountability for our own successes versus a feeling that we should get, a feeling that we deserve more, don't we? Entitlement. And that term again, I mentioned at the top, bailouts. I know that this report speaks into perception today. It was a bit different, maybe a little uncomfortable, right? The reality is it can always feel uncomfortable. My reports always lean into conscious candor. This is super important to consider when we have such a disconnect between the fundamental performances of the capital markets versus our consumer sentiments towards them, especially approaching a more heated political season. It's going to be on steroids coming up, something to consider. I'm Eric Ehrenstoff, and this is the E3 Rate of the Union Mid-Year Report.